Hello everyone, and thank you for watching this video. Today we will be discussing the role of dispositional resistance of change and resistance of change in the adoption of non-pharmaceutical interventions in the context of a pandemic. Our presenters are Arun Pipalani, Shaya Rangarajan, and myself, Jan Ramirez.
Technology acceptance model defining the framework. This research explores the influence of acceptance and perception of change measures on the adoption of new intervention. In today's presentation, first, let's have a brief overview of what TAM, NPIs, and RTC DRTC measures are. Then, let's explore the objective and research design of the study. Finally, let's summarize the research findings to derive future managerial implication. Technology Acceptance Model. Developed by Davis in the year 1986, this intention-based model predicts the acceptance of an individual towards a newly introduced technology. The constructs of Technology Acceptance Model, or the TAM, are perceived usefulness, which refers to the degree to which an individual believes the use of a system could enhance their performance. Next is perceived ease of use, that is, the degree to which an individual perceives that little or no mental and physical effort is required in using a system. Third is the attitude of an individual towards the usage of the new intervention. And finally, it's the behavioral intention towards the actual usage. With these constructs or the traditional components of TAM, new variables are included and the interaction between the components are studied to estimate the effectiveness of the newly implemented program. Adoption of NPIs. Non-pharmaceutical interventions are viable measures that help in slowing the transmission and hence the effect of pandemic. Adoption of NPIs is influenced by numerous factors. This study examines the influence of TAM and perception of change measures in the adoption of NPIs.
Let's now understand the concept of RTC and DRTC. Beginning with RTC, RTC stands for resistance to change. We all know that changes are a part of an individual's life, but often people becomes uncomfortable to accept or say adopt any new change into their lives. I think it's because stability is something which they look for. This is where RTC comes into picture. In general terms, RTC simply means unwillingness of an individual to accept the change. Let's now see what are those dimensions of RTC. So as per Pedret, there are three dimensions or say three factors which affects a person's willingness to adopt any change. It may be behavioral, like due to some intentional actions, a person's willingness to adopt a change changes. It may be emotional, like sometimes due to aggression or frustration, a person's behavior changes towards the adoption for a change. Or it may be cognitive, which simply means a person has some negative thoughts or aspects towards the change. RTC is an important aspect since it helps us to understand the benefits of any change and to what extent it may have an impact to the overall resistance towards an implemented program. If I talk about the impact of RTC, it's usually negative as well as destructive, since it leads to delayed and suboptimal outcomes and sometimes even outright failures. But sometimes its impact may also be mild. Whereas on the other hand, if we look onto DRTC, DRTC stands for dispositional resistance to change. Since changes are inescapable, which eventually affects individuals worldwide. So DRTC is typically described as an individual's propensity to resist making changes, which is of course different from other traits of his or her personality, like sensitivity for uncertainty, it may be assertiveness, or maybe willingness for a new experience or a change. Let's now walk through those dimensions which affect DRTC. So as per OREG, there are mainly four dimensions of DRTC. Number one, it may be routine seeking. Routine seeking simply means like how easy, safe and secure it would be for an individual to adopt a change. Let's take an example of the current COVID-19 pandemic. We all have been advised to wear masks. So how easy people find it to include this wearing a mask parameter into their daily routine. will give us the measure of the DRTC for this particular dimension of routine seeking. It may be emotional, which simply means like how well an individual is connected emotionally to adopt a change. It may be a short term focus. This depicts the individual's understanding, like how well he or she thinks that a short term focus over a change can have a long lasting positive benefit onto their lives. For example, how people get adapt to wearing masks for their future positive impact. Another dimension can be cognitive rigidity, which means that individual already have some negative thoughts about other new change. For example, people may think that wearing mask would be difficult for them as they might feel suffocated. Like RTC, DRTC also is very important because it provides an insight into the actual success of a new measure of change and its influence on the adoption of a program. So the purpose of our study is to explore the influence of DRTC as well as the RTC in adopting the non-pharmaceutical interventions.
Now, let's talk about the hypotheses. The research project has 7 hypotheses. Each of them was created in order to be able to adequately determine how NPIs are affected by different elements such as perceived ease of use, RTC, DRTC, attitude, and behavioral intention. Each of these hypotheses will allow us to better determine the degree of impact these variables have on NPIs. When discussing the research methodology, there are several elements that we need to take into account. The first is the sample and responding characteristics. For this research, we took the population of Canadian citizens. The sampling method we used was a snowball sampling method. We only sampled for the period of fall 2020. We had a total number of 278 responses. And the method of the survey was an online survey questionnaire, as this was the best method to reach a wide amount of people. Next, the measurement and the questionnaire development. The type of questionnaire was a survey, and the source of the questions for our survey was based on existing literature. Now, the method of statistical analysis was used was the partial least squares structure equation modeling, or PLS-SEM. The benefit of partial least squares structural equation, as against alternative method of structural equation modeling covariance-based CB-SEM, is that the covariance-based method contemplates the variance in a variable that is shared with other variables, for instance, common variance, while partial least squares uses the indicator variable's total variance so that it creates a linear combinations of indicator variables to denote the relevant constructs. It was decided to use PLS-SEM as the goal of the research is predicting key target constructs and identification of key driver constructs, for example, the various motivations in this case. And also, as the goal is not related to theory testing or confirmation. Furthermore, the research does not require a global goodness of fit criterion, which is necessary for CB-SEM.
Findings and implication. The results showed that perceived ease of use significantly influences perceived usefulness, which in turn influences the attitude towards usage. It was also confirmed that behavioral intention, which is influenced by attitude of a person, significantly influences the actual usage of the intervention. Interestingly, the influence of DRTC over the perceived ease of use and the influence of RTC over perceived usefulness were found to be not significant. This could be attributed to the fact that although resistance of a person is a key influencer in accepting a change, presence of factors that actually influence the perception of change could impact the effect of resistance. These findings suggest a need for attention on unexplored barriers and also when developing new interventions, along with the perception and acceptance measures, other influencing factors need to be considered. A few limitations encountered during the study are, firstly, the study was performed by considering NPIs in general. Analyzing the adoption of different types of NPIs in future would influence the actual usage of an individual's perception of change. Secondly, although the data were categorized, they were not analyzed based on demographics. Thirdly, the data collected using an online survey could have resulted in self-biased responses while answering the survey questions by the participants. Finally, the social and psychological factors that actually influence or instigate resistance to change were not included in the research model. To conclude, this study confirmed that along with people's belief, attitude, and intention, perceived effortlessness and usefulness have a significant impact on adoption of NPIs. These findings could be used by the decision makers in the future to implement and increase people's participation in adoption of NPIs.